Welcome, you deep divers. Today, we're tackling a framework that, honestly, it aims to rewire our entire understanding of reality at its most fundamental level.
I've read that.
We've got a serious stack of sources here on Generative Ontology Go, for short. And the core idea, well, it's radical.
Uh-huh. It's about flipping a switch on something philosophers and even physicists have taken for granted for millennia,
Which is?
which is the primacy of being. The idea that reality at its base is something static, unchanging, eternal. Think Parmenides, Aristotle, that whole tradition.
Okay, the foundation is solid, unchanging substance.
Right. Gogo looks at that and says, nope, that's backwards. The true primary ground of reality isn't static being, it's becoming.
Becoming. So constant change, flow, generation, that's the fundamental thing.
Precisely. Becoming is primitive. It's the default state. And this leads us to what the sources call the big inversion.
The big inversion.
Okay, lay it on us.
Being the stuff that seems stable, the objects, the laws, it's not the foundation, it's just a crystallization.
Right.
Or maybe a residue.
Yeah, or a temporary coherence is probably the best way to put it within the Jigo framework. It's a pattern that appears within this endless flow of becoming.
So stability is the illusion, or at least the temporary state.
Exactly. The ultimate ontological principle here is incredibly direct. To exist is to become. Reality is a verb.
Wow. Okay. So our mission today, yours and mine, and for you listening, is to really unpack this. We need to get into the nitty-gritty details. How does this work?
Right. We need to look at the engine room.
Exactly. The seed equations that supposedly kickstart everything, this new hierarchy of numbers it proposes, and crucially, the part that makes this more than just philosophy.
The testable physical predictions.
Yes. Can this framework actually be verified or falsified out there in the real world? That's what we're going to explore comprehensively.
To really feel the weight of this shift, you kind of have to understand what it's pushing against.
Yeah.
Classical ontology. Parmenides, for instance. He was almost, well, allergic to change.
Allergic? How so?
He argued that true reality must be being immutable, one, eternal. Because if it changed, it would have to become something it wasn't, which seemed logically impossible to him. So, change, motion, all the stuff we see.
Must be illusion. Or secondary somehow.
Exactly. Secondary, less real. And that baked a paradox right into the foundations of Western thought.
Which is, if the ground state is perfectly static, like a photograph, how do you get a movie? How does anything happen? Where does motion, birth, death, all of it come from?
That's the intractable problem Greer claims to solve elegantly. Classical thinking had to invent all sorts of things, secondary movers, prime movers, divine sparks, just to bridge that gap between the static base and the dynamic world we experience.
It needed a jump-start mechanism.
Right. Griot just dissolves the whole paradox. It says identity isn't some fixed substance. It's just a momentary stabilization within a constantly generating field.
So the problem of origins, where did it all start? Grounds by saying,
It never started in the way we think. Becoming, the flux, is the origin. Genus is the ground state. The engine was always running.
okay, that makes a certain intuitive sense. If flux is the default, you don't need to explain movement. You need to explain stability.
Precisely.
But let's position this against something related. Ontological mathematics, OM. We've touched on this before. The idea, going back to Pythagoras, Leibniz, that all is mathematics.
Yeah,
Elevating math from just describing reality to actually being reality.
So why does GRU see itself as needing to refine or even supersede OM? Isn't math fundamental in GRU too?
It is fundamental, but in a different way. Gruco sees OM as, let's say, a vital stepping stone, but ultimately transitional.
Transitional. Why?
Because OM, in its purest form, tends to freeze mathematics itself into a static Platonic realm. It assumes math just is, eternally complete, waiting out there.
So it swaps one static substance, classical being, for another static substance, mathematical axioms and structures.
You got it. And you run into a similar problem. If math is the static, eternal thing, how does it generate anything? How does it cause change or dynamism? It needs an external push, or relies on pre-existing axioms that themselves aren't explained generatively. It describes the possible patterns, but not the loom that weaves them.
That's a great analogy. Go, on the other hand, aims to be a self-generating system. The refinement is subtle but crucial. All is coherence. Mathematics is its resonance.
Okay, break that down. Coherence and resonance.
Coherence is the underlying unified potential. Get to Zeta Naught soon. Mathematics, geometry, symmetry. These aren't the cause of reality. They are the emergent language that describes the patterns, the stable resonances, the crystallizations that form within that coherent generative flow.
So math is the echo of the creating, the description, not the source code itself.
It's the structure of the process, the grammar of generativity. If OM is the blueprint, Go aims to be the active construction site and the architect in the emerging building all at once. It ties structure to a dynamic, potentially testable flow. That grounding is key.
Okay, if coherence is the real ground floor, we need to find its source. This sounds like where we get into the really deep, maybe counterintuitive parts of COGO, Zeta Naught, the coherence vacuum, and the seed equations. Let's start with the source itself, this Zeta Naught text Z dollar.
Right, text C dollar. This is probably the single most challenging concept because it's defined as being fundamentally irreducible. It is the state of absolute coherence, unbounded, whole, complete potential.
But what is it? Is it a number? A place?
That's the key thing. It's not a number in the way we usually think of numbers. It's not a set. Well, the sources describe it as richer than mathematics itself.
Richer than math.
Yes, it's the generative reservoir from which numberness, structure, and mathematics emerge. Think of it as the ultimate full zero. Not emptiness, but pure, undifferentiated potential. Everything, before it becomes any specific thing.
That distinction, full zero versus empty zero, feels critical. Our normal zero is absence. This text E0 is plenitude.
Exactly. The plenitude of uncollapsed potential. And this potential isn't just floating in nothing. It resides, so to speak, in the coherence vacuum.
The coherence vacuum. Okay, is that like the quantum vacuum? Empty space.
Not quite empty in the classical sense. Think of it as the ontological substrate. A field of pure potentiality, yes, but also maximal symmetry and resonance. The canvas.
The canvas upon which?
Upon which reality, including mathematics and form, gets drawn. But crucially, the drawing emerges through structured resonance reduction.
Resonance reduction, like tuning a radio, picking a station out of the static.
That's a decent analogy. You're reducing the broad spectrum of potential resonances down to specific coherent forms, choosing form from the potential of all forms.
Okay, but what forces that choice? What makes the potential collapse into actuality? This is where the seed equations come in, right? These aren't just math tricks. They're supposed to be ontological laws.
That's the claim. Irreducible laws of Genesis. The first one is in teledollars, equals 1.
0 to the power 0 equals 1. I remember in school that was always treated as undefined, or just a convention to make formulas work.
Right. Mathematically, it's often handled by definition for continuity, especially in series expansions. But Jala says, no, this is fundamental ontology. It's the coherence cascade.
The coherence cascade, meaning...
It represents the necessary, inevitable leap from nullity, the zero base, nothing to multiply, and the absence of any operation, the zero exponent. Don't multiply it at all to the emergence of the first stable thing. Unity, the number one.
Yeah.
It's the universe saying, from absolute potential, the first step must be coherent identity. It's spontaneous emergence.
Wow, okay. Nullity, self-reference in a null way, forces existence, forces the first one. That's the spark of creation. If that's the leap, what provides the stability? The anchor.
That brings us to the second seed equation. $0 is 1 and a 1.
Yeah.
Factorial 0 equals 1.
Okay, factorial, that's the number of ways to arrange things. 3 is 3 by 2 by 1 equals 6 ways. So 0 is the number of ways to arrange nothing.
Exactly. And the fact that it equals 1, not 0, is profoundly significant in Jago. This represents the hypergravity identity.
Hypergravity identity.
It signifies an invariant coherence that must persist even through maximal reduction, even when there are apparently no things to arrange. It's the ghost of order in the void, a foundational anchor ensuring that structure itself doesn't vanish entirely. The sources explicitly link this to hypergravity, a fundamental attractive force of coherence itself. Order persists.
So, every L11 creates the first identity, and 0L1 ensures identity itself is anchored, even in apparent emptiness. Does this scale? What about this infinite tower idea?
Yes, the expression text nest and feed, infinite evening. This uses Knuth arrows for hyperexponentiation. Basically, text noders raised to the power of text deuterus an infinite number of times.
Starting from absolute coherence and self-referencing infinitely.
It stabilizes inevitably into unity.
Right.
1. This isn't just a mathematical curiosity. It's presented as ontological proof that the self-recursion of becoming, rooted in absolute coherence, cannot dissolve into infinite chaos or complexity. Identity stable coherence 1 is the ultimate attractor state.
Okay, so there's 3, $2 and 1 and the text unity, infinite tower stabilization are like the core code, the generative DNA.
That's a good way to put it. They define the engine.
Now, how does this engine connect to, well, everything else? Physics, mind, math. Go talks about a triad of existence governed by a meta-operator.
Right. This is crucial for making Go a holistic framework, not just abstract math. It insists that existence isn't just one thing. It inherently manifests in three inseparable co-emergent dimensions.
Future.
One, physics. This is the realm we usually think of: matter, energy, space-time, the coherence vacuum itself, and this idea of hypergravity. It's this sort of structural outcome of coherence breaking symmetry.
Right, the physical stage, too.
Two, qualionomics. This is a big one. It's consciousness, subjectivity, the raw feel of experience, qualia experience fields. Go doesn't treat consciousness as an afterthought or an accident of complexity.
It's fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. A core dimension of the generative process itself. It's the universe experiencing itself.
And the third part of the triad.
Three, organization form. This is where mathematics, symmetry, geometry, and what Go calls coherence engines reside. It's the formal structure, the language, the patterns that describe the relationships within and between the other two dimensions.
So it's not just mind and matter, but mind, matter, and the mathematical form that relates them, all arising together.
Co-emergently, yes. None is reducible to the others. And this whole triad isn't static. It's dynamically modulated by what's called the meta-operator.
The meta-operator, and this involves two sub-operators, SKO and ARO.
Correct. Think of the meta-operator as the overall governor of reality's dynamics, constantly balancing two opposing tendencies. First is SCO, the symmetry coherence operator.
SCO, symmetry and coherence, what does it do?
It enhances coherence. It pushes towards integration, unity, pattern formation, symmetry preservation or restoration. And here's a major claim. Go identifies SKO directly with consciousness.
Wait, consciousness is the operator that increases coherence, not just a result of it.
That's the proposal. Consciousness isn't passive. It's an active principle in the universe that seeks and builds coherence, integration, understanding. It's the universe trying to bring itself into focus.
Okay. Wow. If SKO is integration and consciousness, what's its opposite? ARO.
ARO is the asymmetry resonance operator. If SKO integrates, ARO differentiates. It reduces coherence. Is associated with observation, measurement, symmetry breaking, the emergence of distinct forms and particles.
So ARO is like making distinctions, collapsing possibilities, the act of measuring.
Exactly. When you observe or measure a system, you force it out of a superposition, high coherence, into a specific state. Reduced coherence, increased asymmetry. Matter, mass, distinct particles, the stuff of classical being. These emerge as the asymmetries, the residues left when coherence is reduced by ARO. Think of ARO as related to information gained through differentiation, maybe even entropy in a sense.
So reality is this constant dance, this tension between SEO trying to unify and see the whole picture, and ARO trying to observe, measure, and create distinct parts.
Precisely. The meta-operator is that dynamic unity of SEO and ARO, governing the modulation of reality between coherence and differentiation.
All right, this next section feels like where Go really has to deliver on its name, Generative Ontology. It claims to generate the very architecture of mathematics itself from this coherence engine. We're used to numbers being axioms, just given.
Right. The Peano axioms, set theory foundations, numbers are usually the starting point. Go says they are the output. They emerge as structured steps down from text DAL.
And to understand that emergence, we have to go back to the origin point, 0. But you're saying it's not just 1 0, there are 7 classes of nullity. That sounds incredibly complex.
It is detailed, but it's claimed to be necessary. If you treat 0 as just absence, you miss its operational power. In JGO, 0 isn't a single passive point. It's a family of distinct operators. Getting these distinctions right is apparently crucial.
Okay, 7 zeros. Let's try to keep them straight. Maybe start with the ones related to the seed equations we've just discussed.
Good idea. First, there's the one we all know. Arithmetic 0, 0, 0. The baseline, the additive identity, the point of balance and subtraction, called the zero of incoherence or absence in a simple arithmetic sense.
Okay, standard 0.
Second, factorial 0, $0 alas. As we discussed, this is an absence. It's the coherence identity. It's that anchor of hypergravity, proving structure persists even in apparent emptiness. It equals 1.
The anchor is 0. And third,
exponential 0. Again, as discussed, this is the seed of emergence. The operator that forces the seed 1-on-1 cascade, bridging potentiality 0 number to the first actuality 1.
Okay, so baseline 0, anchor 0, emergent 0. Those 3 seem tied directly to the generative mechanics. What about the other 4? What deeper levels are there?
Fourth is Zeta Naught itself. We've talked about this, the absolute coherence, the generative reservoir before any reduction, the full 0 containing all potential. It's the ultimate source 0.
Source 0, got it. Fifth,
a tower 0. 0 to r in power.
Okay.
This relates to those infinite towers. It represents recursive potential, reservoirs of coherence that are still undecided or oscillating in potentially infinite processes. Think of it as the 0 of uncollapsed recursive possibility.
Possibility is 0. Okay, 2 left.
Sixth is dimensional 0. This one is really interesting, especially when we get to irrational numbers. It represents projection loss. It's the apparent incoherence or nothingness that arises when a higher dimensional, perfectly coherent structure is viewed or shadowed in a lower dimension. Information seems lost, creating a kind of 0.
The shadow 0. And the last one.
Seventh, symmetry 0. This is the balance point in transformations. Think of the neutral state in a symmetry group, the point of equilibrium around which operations happen. It's the 0 of perfect balance or invariance in change.
Okay. Arithmetic, factorial, exponential, Zeta Naught, tower, dimensional symmetry. Wow, that's a lot packed into nothing. Confusing them would definitely muddy the waters.
The claim is that defining them clearly unlocks the rest of the structure.
So let's move to that structure, the natural numbers. 1, 2, 3. If they aren't just axioms for counting, what are they in ego?
They're emergent coherence depths, or eigenmodes. Think of them as stable configurations, quantized levels of coherence reduction from text to outer. Counting isn't arbitrary. It traces the necessary sequence of stable structures that can emerge.
Coherence depths. Can you give them, like, qualitative meanings? What does 1 mean ontologically here, beyond just 1?
Yes, the sources do exactly that. 1. Unity identity. The first stable eigenmode, achieved by the 21-1 cascade, the birth of self-identity. 2. Polarity relation. The first differentiation. You need 2 to have relationship, opposition, reflection, the emergence of duality.
Okay. 1 is identity, 2 is difference. What about 3?
3. Resonance stability. This is seen as the first truly stable structure. Think of a triangle, the simplest stable polygon. 3 points define a plane. It represents resonant closure, the first stable system.
And 4.
4-dimension framework. 4 points can define a tetrahedron, the simplest volume. It establishes spatial framework and closure, the basis for coordinates and dimensionality as we perceive it.
So the numbers themselves have intrinsic meaning related to how coherence structures itself.
Interesting. If the naturals are the stable depths, what about the prime numbers? They feel fundamental.
They absolutely are. Primes 2, 3, 5, 7 are the irreducible eigenvalues. They are the coherence steps, the resonance nodes that cannot be broken down into products of smaller, simpler resonance corridors. They are the absolute bedrock.
The skeleton of number, resistant to decomposition.
Exactly. The fundamental theorem of arithmetic that every number has a unique prime factorization is reinterpreted in GEGO as the unique dephasing sequence of coherence corridors. It's the only way a complex coherence state, a composite number, can be built up from or decomposed into the irreducible prime resonances.
Okay, this reframing naturally leads to big questions in math, like the Riemann hypothesis. Huge unsolved problem about prime distribution. How does Gale view it?
Classically, yes. It's about where the non-trivial zeros of the Riemann zeta function lie. Gale steps back and looks at the dynamics of coherence. It reframes the hypothesis as potentially representing the critical isotherm of coherence. Critical isotherm. Like a temperature line. A boundary.
Sort of. An isotherm is a line of constant temperature. Here, it's a line of constant coherence stability. The Riemann zeta function essentially sums up contributions from all the number resonances related to primes. The points where this sum goes to 0, the non-trivial zeros, represent configurations of perfect global cancellation or resonance balance across all number pathways.
A state of perfect, system-wide stability.
A kind of maximal temporary stability. And the hypothesis states these zeros all lie in a specific line in the complex plane, the critical line where the real part is exactly 12. Diro interprets this 12 as the precise balance point.
Balance between what?
Between those two operators we discussed. Aero, dispersion, the tendency towards differentiation, expansion, maybe entropy, and SEO, damping the tendency towards integration, stability, coherence. The critical line, if the hypothesis holds, might be the exact mathematical condition where these two fundamental forces are perfectly balanced across the infinite structure of number.
That's a breathtaking reinterpretation, tying the most famous problem in pure math to the fundamental dynamics of reality itself. Okay, moving on. From discrete numbers to the ones that seem broken. Irrational numbers, like pi or the square root of 2. They can't be written as simple fractions.
Right. Traditionally defined by their failure to be a ratio of integers. Dago makes another huge claim here through the principle of dimensional rationality. PDR.
Dimensional rationality, what does it state?
It states that irrationality, as we perceive it, is not a fundamental property of the number itself. It's an artifact.
An artifact of what?
of dimensional reduction.
Wait a minute, you're saying pi isn't really irrational for
Mhm.
score 2? That the reason we can only approximate them is because we're looking at them in the wrong dimension?
That feels bold.
Almost like blaming the observer for the number's properties?
It is bold, absolutely, but it comes with a proposed mechanism. The PDR argues that any number that appears irrational in our current dimensional frame, say 3 spatial plus 1 time, is actually a perfectly rational relationship, a simple ratio, viewed within a higher dimensional coherence frame.
So the number itself isn't broken, our view of it is incomplete, it's rational just somewhere else.
That's the idea. It's not failing to be a ratio. It's signaling that its true, simple ratio exists in dimensions we've projected away or haven't accessed. The irrationality is a clue, a pointer to hidden coherence.
Can you give a concrete example of how that might work? Score 2?
Okay, consider the diagonal of a unit square in a 2D plane. Its length is square 2, which is irrational. But the underlying relationship defining it is the Pythagorean theorem. $12 plus 12 equals, or sex by dollars plus y2 excel square t2. This equation itself involves only integer powers and coefficients. It's structurally rational. The irrationality emerges when we try to express the length L as a simple ratio within that 2D frame. Goethe suggests that if we could embed this geometry in the correct higher dimensional coherence space, the relationship corresponding to score 2 would resolve into a simple ratio of integer-like coherence units in that higher space. The irrationality is at the form of that dimensional zero we talked about, projection loss.
So irrationality is a shadow, a signpost pointing towards unseen dimensions needed to restore the true picture.
Exactly. And they even define a concept called the dimensional rationality index. For any apparent irrational alpha, this index delta would be the minimum number of additional dimensions needed to lift it into a coherence frame where it becomes rational.
Which implies a number theory could potentially tell us about the dimensionality of reality. Fascinating. Okay, finally, complex numbers. Numbers with I, the square root of -1. If irrationals point to hidden dimensions, what do complex numbers do?
They provide the mechanism for navigating relationships between dimensions, particularly orthogonal ones. The imaginary unit, I, isn't truly imaginary in GGO.
It's the operator of orthogonal rotation, like a 90-degree turn in coherence space.
Precisely. The complex plane, with its real and imaginary axes, becomes the natural stage for anything involving rotation, oscillation, waves. It inherently unifies linear progression, real axis, with a cyclical change, imaginary axis. Think of Euler's formula, n theta plus I sin theta. It perfectly marries exponential growth decay with wave behavior. Gargo sees this as fundamental to reality's dynamics.
And what about complex calculus, holomorphy?
Holomorphy, the property of being differentiable in the complex plane, is interpreted profoundly. It signifies perfect coherent continuity. A function being holomorphic means its local behavior dictates its global behavior. Local order guarantees global order. There are no sudden breaks or inconsistencies. Logo sees this as a mathematical reflection of the underlying coherence of reality itself. If a process is locally coherent in this complex sense, its coherence extends throughout its domain.
Local guarantees global. That sounds powerful.
It is. And this naturally leads to hypercomplex structures built on this idea: quaternions for 3D rotation spatial resonance, octonions, Clifford algebras. Goes views these not as just abstract algebraic toys, but as potentially the true mathematical language for describing the universal architecture of coherence across multiple interacting dimensions. So we've laid out the philosophical shift from being to becoming, and this incredibly detailed structure of how numbers might emerge from coherence. But, for Goes to be more than just a fascinating idea, it needs to do two things: connect with the real world through tests, and maybe resolve some existing roadblocks in science and math.
Let's tackle a big roadblock first. Gödel's incompleteness theorems. These always felt like a fundamental limit on knowledge, showing that formal systems like math can't prove their own consistency and completeness from within.
Exactly, a powerful result. If you view mathematics as a closed, self-contained formal system, playing by its own rules, Gödel showed it inevitably hits paradoxes of self-reference. It can't fully vouch for itself using only its own symbols.
A kind of intellectual catch-22 baked into logic itself. How does Dro claim to get around this?
By fundamentally challenging the premise that mathematics is a closed system. Joes argues that mathematics is an open system.
Open? Open to what?
Open to and emergent from the external reality of coherence, the reality generated from text sources, the source we keep coming back to.
Okay. So the problem wasn't inherent to math or logic, but to the assumption that math was isolated, floating free from reality.
That's the core argument. Mathematical truth in the Joe framework isn't just about internal symbolic consistency, syntactic truth. It's ultimately secured by coherence consistency with the ontological generator, with tuus texacer. Because math emerges from this grounded generative reality, it inherits its consistency from that external source.
So it bypasses the self-reference problem by having an external anchor. Math isn't trying to prove itself using only itself. It's validated by its consistent reflection of the underlying generative process.
Precisely. Gödel's limit still applies perfectly to closed formal systems. But if math is an open, emergent language describing a fundamentally coherent reality generated from outside the system itself, then the paradox dissolves. Consistency comes from the territory, not just the map.
That's a really elegant way to reframe it. Okay, if it's grounded in this generative reality, that leads directly to the next crucial step. Empirical validation. You mentioned testable predictions. This is where a Gödel has to, put his money where its mouth is.
Absolutely. Without falsifiable predictions, it remains metaphysics. But the sources claim Gödel offers specific, quantitative predictions that differ from standard models in key areas of physics. These differences arise because Gödel introduces coherence eigenvalues and the scalar dynamics as fundamental forces.
Okay, give us the headline predictions. Where should physicists be looking? Let's start small, particle physics.
Neutrino physics is highlighted as a prime area. Neutrinos are weird. They oscillate, changing flavors and seemingly mass in ways not fully explained by the standard model. Go proposes that these oscillations, particularly their damping patterns, are directly governed by coherence eigenvalues.
So?
The idea is that particle mass itself is related to coherent states, and the way neutrinos shift between states reflects transitions between these fundamental coherence levels. Go predicts specific damping rates and patterns based on its coherence mechanics. Measuring neutrino oscillations with higher precision could directly test these predictions. Finding the predicted patterns would be strong evidence.
Okay, neutrinos as probes of fundamental coherence. What about on the grandest scales? Cosmology.
In cosmology, Gorgo challenges the standard cold-dark matter CDM model for how large-scale structures form. CDM relies mostly on gravity pulling dark matter together. Gorgo predicts deviations from this.
Deviations how?
It suggests that the formation of galaxy clusters and filaments isn't just gravitational accretion. It's guided or selected by the underlying coherence structure, those coherence depths we talked about, related to natural numbers, and the interplay of SKO integration and ARO differentiation. This should lead to specific, non-random patterns in galaxy clustering, maybe preferred scales or alignments, that differ subtly but measurably from pure CDM predictions.
So astronomers should look for structure patterns that seem too organized or specific to be just gravity and random chance.
Essentially, yes. Structure patterns that hint at an underlying coherent selection principle at work.
All right, particle physics, cosmology. What about things in between, like stars and quasars, astrophysics?
Astrophysics gets a new lens, too. Take quasars' incredibly bright galactic cores. Standard explanation involves matter falling onto a supermassive black hole. Co offers a complementary or alternative view, quasar emissions as massive bursts of coherence re-radiation.
Coherence re-radiation.
When a system undergoes a rapid, large-scale reduction in coherence, perhaps triggered by extreme gravitational collapse related to ARO, the released coherence potential could manifest as the intense radiation bursts seen from quasars. It connects energy released directly to changes in the coherent state. Also, stellar fusion.
Yes.
DO models fusion conditions based on coherence-driven symmetry reductions. This might suggest that fusion could potentially be initiated or sustained under conditions perhaps lower temperatures or different confinement methods than the standard model currently predicts if specific coherent states can be achieved. This could have huge implications for energy research, obviously.
No kidding. Okay, so across the board from neutrinos to galaxies to fusion, DO seems to offer concrete physical mechanisms linked to coherence that lead to testable deviations from current theories.
That's the claim. And notice how it aims to unify these different areas.
How so?
Well, it's providing a single framework that attempts to integrate the analytic truths of mathematics and logic, derived from the seed equations and coherence structures, that's the rationalist aspect, with the empirical data from physics, the testable predictions, the empiricist aspect, and it explicitly includes subjectivity and consciousness, qualionomics, SKO, the experiential aspect.
Mind, matter, and math, all emerging from and governed by this principle of becoming, driven by coherence dynamics.
It's a truly vast synthesis. And by laying out these mechanisms in such comprehensive detail, the hope is to move beyond paradox and toward a more unified understanding. Hashtag outro.
We have covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into generative ontology. We really tried to get into the comprehensive details of its mechanisms. We started with that fundamental inversion.
Right, shifting the ground of reality from static being, which Go argues is just a temporary pattern, a crystallization.
To dynamic becoming. The idea that existence is process, flow, generation. That's the bedrock.
And the engine of that becoming. Zeta Naught, Sig Sex Stellar, the reservoir of absolute coherence, richer than math itself. Along with those crucial seed equations.
2 and L are 1, the spark of emergence, and $0, the anchor of identity persistence.
Exactly. And we navigated those 7 distinct classes of zero, showing nothing is actually a complex set of operational potentials.
Which then generate the numbers themselves. Naturals is coherence depths, primes is irreducible resonances, complex numbers handling orthogonal relationships.
Leading us to that really provocative idea. The principle of dimensional rationality, PDR.
Right. The claim that irrational numbers aren't fundamentally irrational, they're just rational relationships waiting for us to see them in the right higher dimensional context.
And that brings us perfectly to our final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. It ties that abstract PDR right back to the concrete constants that govern our physical universe.
We talked about the dimensional rationality index, the idea that for any irrational number alpha, like pi or e, there's a minimum number of hidden dimensions needed to make it appear rational.
We know those mathematical constants are irrational in our familiar 4D spacetime. But what about the physical constants?
You mean things like the fine structure constant, which governs electromagnetism, or Newton's gravitational constant G Planck's constant h? These numbers that seem arbitrary, just measured values.
What if they aren't arbitrary at all? What if their apparent irrationality is also just a projection effect?
What if these fundamental constants of nature are, in fact, signposts, where the degree of their irrationality, their white det value, if we could calculate it, tells us precisely the number of hidden coherence dimensions required to see the universe's underlying mathematical harmony?
Could the constants themselves be mapping the unseen dimensionality of reality? Are they clues left by the coherent structure telling us where the deeper, simpler truth resides?
Something profound to consider. The idea that the very numbers defining our physics might be echoes from a higher dimensional, perfectly rational cosmos.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly detailed journey into generative ontology and this comprehensive exploration of becoming.